They wanted me broken. They expected me to crumble, to hand over everything my husband and I built together, to disappear quietly into the background while they carved up our life like vultures. What they didn't expect was for me to fight back, or for his own mother to choose my side. Let me take you back to the morning that changed everything. It was exactly 17 days after we buried Michael. 17 days of casseroles I couldn't eat, sympathy cards I couldn't read, and a silence in our house so thick it felt like drowning. I was sitting at our kitchen table, still in my bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon, when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the frosted glass, I could see 3 figures. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door, because I recognized that stance, that predatory way Michael's brother David always stood when he wanted something. Next to him was his wife Karen, and behind them, surprisingly, was Michael's younger sister Beth. "Sarah," David said, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past me into my foyer. "We need to talk." Karen was already eyeing our living room like she was appraising it for an estate sale. Beth at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but she followed them in anyway. "About what?" I asked, though something cold was already settling in my chest. David pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. "About the business. About the house. About getting things sorted out properly." The way he said properly made my skin crawl. Like there was something improper about me being there, in my own home, grieving my husband of 12 years. "Michael left everything to me," I said quietly. "The will was very clear." "The will," Karen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, honey, you don't understand business. You've never understood business. Michael always handled everything financial while you did your little art projects." "My little art projects?" As if the graphic design work I'd done for our construction company for the past 8 years was just a hobby. As if I hadn't designed every logo, every business card, every website that helped build what we had. "The company needs real leadership now," David continued, spreading papers across my coffee table like he owned the place. "I've been in construction for 20 years. I know the contractors, I know the suppliers. You know Photoshop." I stared at those papers, my vision blurring slightly. Among them I could see transfer documents, signature lines, legal jargon that might as well have been written in another language. But I didn't need to understand every word to know what they were asking. They wanted me to sign it all away. "And the house?" I managed to ask. Beth finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, this place is too big for just you. And honestly, with Michael gone, can you even afford the mortgage?" The mortgage Michael and I had paid off 3 years ago. The mortgage that no longer existed. Either Beth genuinely didn't know our financial situation, or she was lying to my face. I wasn't sure which felt worse. "I think you should all leave," I said. David's demeanor shifted instantly. The fake sympathy vanished, replaced by something much colder. "Don't be stupid, Sarah. We're family. We're trying to help you here. But if you want to make this difficult..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. After they left, I sat in that empty house for hours, staring at the papers they'd left behind. Part of me wondered if they were right. Part of me wondered if I should just sign everything over and disappear. It would be easier. It would be quieter. But then I walked into Michael's office, saw the framed photo of us at our company's 5-year anniversary party. We were holding a bottle of champagne, both of us covered in paint from the renovation we'd just finished on the Henderson project. We looked so proud. So happy. So alive. That's when I knew I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 17 days. I got dressed. Really dressed. Put on makeup. Drove to our company office for the first time since the accident. Our office manager, Janet, looked like she'd seen a ghost when I walked in. "Sarah? Oh honey, we didn't expect. I mean, David said you weren't." David said. What exactly? Janet's face went red. He's been telling people you're not really involved in the business side. That you might be stepping back. I felt that familiar cold settling in my chest again. David had been there. At our office. Talking to our employees. Making decisions. Janet, I need you to pull all of our financial records from the past 6 months. Client contracts, supplier agreements, everything. And I need the keys to Michael's office. Michael's office felt like a museum. Everything exactly as he'd left it. His coffee mug still sitting on his desk, half full and growing a thin film of mold. His jacket hanging on the back of his chair. But when I sat down at his computer and started going through files, I found something that made my blood run cold. David had been busy. Very busy. There were emails dated from the week after the funeral. Communications with our biggest clients, introducing himself as the new point of contact for the company. Messages to suppliers about restructuring under new management. He'd even scheduled meetings with 3 of our most important contractors for next week. He was stealing my company from under me, one email at a time. But here's what David didn't know about me, what none of them knew. Those little art projects Karen had mocked? They weren't just pretty pictures. I'd been handling our digital marketing, our client communications, our entire online presence for years. I knew every password, every account, every digital fingerprint of our business. And I knew something else. Something Michael had shared with me just 2 months before he passed away, when we were lying in bed talking about expanding the business. You know what we should do, Sarah? We should start offering design-build services. Not just construction, but full renovation planning. Architecture, interior design, the whole package. You've got the eye for it, and I've got the construction side. We could double our revenue. We'd never moved forward with the idea because Michael got busy with the Patterson commercial project. But now, sitting in his empty office, I realized this might be my way forward. I spent the next 3 days working 16-hour days. I created a complete business plan for expanding our services. I reached out to every client we'd worked with in the past 5 years, personally. I redesigned our entire brand identity to reflect the new direction. I even found 2 architects and an interior designer who were interested in partnering with us. By Friday, I had something David and his 20 years of construction experience didn't have, a vision for the future. But I still had to deal with the legal challenge to the will. And that's when things got really ugly. The meeting was set for the following Monday at the law office of Bradford, Stone and Associates. Michael's lawyer, Jim Bradford, had handled our wills, our business incorporation, everything legal for the past decade. Walking into that conference room and seeing David, Karen, and Beth sitting on one side of the table while I sat alone on the other, it felt like facing a firing squad. Their lawyer was a shark in an expensive suit named Richard Stone. He slid a document across the table to Jim with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. My clients are contesting the validity of the will on the grounds that Michael Patterson was not of sound mind when it was executed, due to the medications he was taking for his back injury. I felt the room tilt. Michael had been on pain medication after his construction accident 8 months ago. Strong medication. But he'd been completely lucid when we updated our wills. We'd talked about every decision, every clause. Furthermore, Stone continued, we have evidence that Mrs. Patterson exerted undue influence over the deceased, isolating him from his family and manipulating him into leaving her assets that rightfully belonged to his blood relatives. Isolating him from his family. I almost laughed, if it wasn't so horrifying. Michael's family had barely been part of our lives until there was money at stake. David showed up for Christmas and Easter, if we were lucky. Beth lived 3 states away and called maybe once a month. Karen had never liked me from day one, and made no effort to hide it. But their lawyer was smooth, prepared. He had medical records showing Michael's prescription history. He had statements from people claiming I'd prevented Michael from spending time with his family. He even had some twisted version of our decision to pay off the house early, framing it as me pressuring Michael to put assets out of reach of his rightful heirs. By the time Stone finished his presentation, I felt like I was drowning. These people had been planning this for months, maybe years. They'd been waiting for Michael to pass away so they could swoop in and take everything. That's when Jim Bradford opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Interesting arguments, Mr. Stone. But I think you'll find them difficult to support. He spread several documents across the table. First, Michael Patterson updated his will not 8 months ago when he was on medication, but 3 years ago, during a routine estate planning review. He was on no medications at that time, and the will was witnessed by 2 independent parties with no connection to Mrs. Patterson. David's face was already changing color, but Jim wasn't finished. Second, regarding claims of isolation, I have here phone records showing that Michael initiated contact with his family members far more often than they contacted him. I also have calendar entries from his personal planner showing numerous invitations extended to family members for holidays and gatherings, most of which were declined. Karen was staring at the documents like they might catch fire. And third, Jim said, pulling out what looked like a handwritten letter, I have this document, written entirely in Michael's handwriting and dated 6 months ago, specifically anticipating a challenge to his will. He began to read aloud, if anything happens to me, I want it clearly understood that every decision Sarah and I have made regarding our assets has been mutual and well considered. Sarah has been my full partner in building this business, contributing not just her design skills but her business acumen and vision. She understands the company better than anyone, including my own family members who have shown little interest in our work over the years. My greatest fear is that my family will try to take advantage of her grief to claim assets they have no moral or legal right to. I trust Sarah completely to honor our shared dreams and continue the work we started together. The silence in that room was deafening. But Stone wasn't giving up that easily. Convenient document to suddenly appear, don't you think? How do we know this wasn't forged? Jim smiled. Handwriting analysis, of course. Which I had done preemptively. He slid another document across the table. Independent verification that this letter was indeed written by Michael Patterson, in his hand, with ink that matches samples from his personal journal dating back months. I watched David's face go from red to gray. Karen was staring at her hands. Beth looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. But the real shock came when the conference room door opened and someone walked in who I absolutely did not expect to see. Michael's mother, Eleanor. Eleanor was 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and had always been cordial to me but never particularly warm. She lived in a retirement community about an hour away and rarely got involved in family drama. Seeing her walk into that legal conference room was like watching a ghost materialize. I'm sorry I'm late, she said calmly, taking a seat next to me. Next to me. Not next to her own children. David found his voice first. Mom, what are you doing here? Eleanor opened her purse and pulled out her own folder of papers. I'm here to make sure my son's wishes are respected. And to provide some context that might be helpful. She looked directly at Stone. Young man, I've been watching my children for 78 years. I know exactly who they are and what they're capable of. David hasn't visited his brother more than 5 times in the past 3 years. Beth lives her own life and that's fine, but she was never close to Michael. And Karen. Eleanor's voice became ice cold. Karen told me at Michael's funeral that it was probably for the best because now the family could sort out his mess of a business. Karen went white. Sarah, Eleanor continued, turning to me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, warmth. Sarah was at the hospital every day during Michael's back surgery. Sarah drove 2 hours each way to bring me groceries when I had pneumonia last winter. Sarah sent me photos of my grandchildren every week, even though I know my own children barely take pictures of them. Wait. Grandchildren? Michael and I didn't have children. We'd tried for years, but it never happened. One of the many heartbreaks we'd shared together. Eleanor saw my confusion and smiled sadly. The grandchildren I never had, dear. But the ones you and Michael talked about adopting. The foster children you were planning to take in once the business was more stable. Michael told me all about your plans. About how you'd already started converting the spare bedroom. The spare bedroom. We had started talking about adoption. We'd even attended a few information sessions. But we'd kept it private, not wanting to jinx anything or deal with family opinions before we were ready. Eleanor wasn't finished. So when my children came to me last month, asking me to support their claim that Sarah was somehow unfit to inherit Michael's assets, I did some investigating of my own. She opened her folder and began laying out photographs, documents, receipts. These are photos of Sarah and Michael at every family gathering for the past 5 years. Notice how in most of them, Sarah is the one taking care of the food, the cleanup, the logistics. Notice how she's the one engaging with the elderly relatives, helping with coats, making sure everyone feels included. She pulled out a stack of receipts. These are receipts for gifts Sarah bought for family birthdays and holidays, gifts that my own children claimed credit for. $300 for David's daughter's graduation present. $200 for Beth's son's birthday party. All purchased by Sarah, all appreciated by the recipients who never knew the gifts didn't actually come from their aunts and uncles. David was studying the table like it contained the secrets of the universe. And this, Eleanor said, pulling out what looked like a printed email, is a message Sarah sent me 2 days after Michael's funeral, asking if there was anything she could do to help me through this difficult time. Asking if I needed groceries, or rides to appointments, or just someone to talk to. My own children were so busy planning this meeting that none of them bothered to check on their mother. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Karen sniffling. Eleanor stood up, gathering her papers. Michael chose well when he married Sarah. She's been more of a daughter to me than my actual daughter, and more of a sister to Michael than his siblings ever were. If you want to challenge his will, you'll have to go through me. And I promise you, I have a lot more ammunition where this came from. She walked to the door, then turned back. Sarah, dear, would you like to come to dinner this Sunday? I'm making that pot roast you always said you wanted the recipe for. After Eleanor left, the fight went out of David's legal team pretty quickly. Stone mumbled something about needing to reassess the strength of their case, and within 30 minutes, papers were being shuffled back into briefcases and David was avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. But I wasn't done yet. Before everyone leaves, I said, standing up for the first time since the meeting began, I have something to say. David looked up with something that might have been hope. Maybe he thought I was going to offer some kind of compromise, some way for everyone to save face. I know what you've been doing with the business, David. The emails to clients, the meetings with suppliers, the attempts to position yourself as the new owner. As of this morning, I've secured signed contracts with every major client we've worked with in the past 2 years, personally guaranteeing continuity of service under my leadership. I've also established new partnerships that will allow us to expand into design-build services, potentially doubling our revenue within 18 months. I pulled out my own folder of papers. These are financial projections based on the new business model Michael and I discussed before he passed away. Conservative estimates show we could grow from our current annual revenue of $2.3 million to over $4 million within 2 years. David's mouth was hanging open slightly. The business you thought was too complicated for me to understand? The business you assumed would collapse without male leadership? It's not just surviving. It's about to thrive. I looked each of them in the eye. You're welcome to be part of that success, as employees. But make no mistake about who's in charge. The meeting ended with handshakes that felt more like surrenders. David and Karen left without saying goodbye. Beth lingered for a moment, looking like she wanted to say something, but ultimately just nodded and followed her siblings out. Jim Bradford packed up his papers with the satisfied air of a lawyer who'd just won a case he'd never doubted. "Sarah, I have to say, Michael would be proud. Not just of how you handled today, but of everything you're building." But the real conversation happened 2 hours later, when Eleanor called me. "Sarah? I hope I didn't overstep today. I know family dynamics can be complicated, and I didn't want to make things harder for you." I was sitting in Michael's office again, looking at the photo of us at the company anniversary party. "Eleanor, you saved my life today. Literally. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, dear. You need to answer a question for me." "What's that?" "Are you really planning to expand into design build services? Because if you are, I know someone who might be able to help." It turned out Eleanor's retirement community was full of former professionals looking for part-time consulting work. Within 2 weeks, I had a retired architect, a former interior designer, and a project manager who'd worked for one of the largest construction firms in the state. All of them excited about the possibility of staying active in their fields, all of them impressed with the business plan I'd put together. The first design-build project came through 3 months later. The Hendersons, a young couple who'd used our construction services 2 years earlier, wanted to completely renovate their kitchen. Not just rebuild it, but redesign the entire space to be more functional for their growing family. I threw myself into that project like my life depended on it. Because in many ways, it did. Every design decision, every material choice, every problem we solved felt like proof that I could do this. That Michael had been right to trust me with everything we'd built together. The kitchen renovation took 6 weeks and came in under budget. The Hendersons were so thrilled they recommended us to 4 other families. Within 6 months, design-build projects made up 40% of our revenue. But the real victory came 8 months after that horrible meeting in the lawyer's office. I was working late one evening, finalizing plans for a whole house renovation, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's name. "Sarah? It's David. I wanted to call and congratulate you. I heard about the Morrison project." The Morrison project was our biggest contract yet, a complete renovation of a 1920s mansion that had been featured in the local newspaper's business section. The article had called our work innovative and exactly what the local construction industry needed. "Thanks," I said, not sure where this conversation was going. "Listen, I know things got ugly between us. I know I handled everything wrong after Michael died. I was scared, I guess. Scared that without him everything would fall apart, and I thought if I could just take control." He trailed off, and for the first time since I'd known him, David sounded genuinely vulnerable. "I miss him too, you know," he continued. "Michael was the best of all of us. And watching what you've built, what you've done with the company. I think he'd be amazed." We talked for 20 minutes. Not about business, not about money, but about Michael. About memories, about the kind of person he'd been, about how much we both missed his terrible jokes and his habit of singing off-key in the shower. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was something like peace. The lawsuit was officially dropped 2 weeks later. David, Karen, and Beth signed documents acknowledging my sole ownership of both the business and the house. In return, I agreed to hire David for specific projects where his expertise would be valuable, paying him a fair contractor's wage but with no ownership stake. It felt like justice. Not the dramatic, vengeful kind you see in movies, but the quiet, sustainable kind that actually lets you sleep at night. A year later, I was standing in that same kitchen where David had first tried to intimidate me into signing away my life. But now the room was full of people: Eleanor, who'd become a weekly dinner companion, Janet from the office, who'd become one of my closest friends, the architects and designers who'd helped transform the business, even Beth, who'd driven in from 3 states away to celebrate the company's best year ever. We were toasting the completion of our 15th design-build project and the signing of contracts for 8 more. The business Michael and I had started in our garage had become something neither of us had dared to imagine. But the moment that meant the most came when Eleanor pulled me aside later that evening. "Sarah, I have something for you." She handed me a small wrapped box. "Michael asked me to hold on to this until the right time. I think that time is now." Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny house. On the back was engraved, "Home is wherever we build it together." He had this made for your 5th wedding anniversary, Eleanor explained. But then he decided he wanted to wait for a special moment to give it to you. He said he'd know when the time was right. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, and for the first time in over a year, I felt Michael's presence not as an absence, but as a foundation. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, everything I'd become, it was all built on the solid ground of what we'd created together. The people who'd expected me to crumble had taught me something valuable. I was stronger than anyone, including myself, had realized. The business they'd thought was too complex for me to handle was now thriving under my leadership. The house they'd assumed I couldn't afford was now the gathering place for a chosen family that supported and celebrated each other. And the mother-in-law who'd surprised everyone by choosing love over blood? She'd become the grandmother figure I'd never had, and I'd become the daughter she'd always hoped for. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, building something beautiful, and proving that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake you ever make. If you've ever faced people who tried to take advantage of your grief, your vulnerability, or your supposed limitations, I hope my story reminds you of something important: you're stronger than they think you are. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people you least expect will stand up and fight beside you. Drop a comment if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, and hit subscribe for more stories about finding strength you never knew you had.